Greetings, salutations, and welcome to the Kreeger Cast. I'm your host, Patrick Kreeger, and today I am joined by Brandon F.
Good afternoon, sir.
So, Brandon, do you mind taking a moment to describe your channel for the audience?
Yes, I am a military reenactor, which effectively means that on my weekends I don the uniform of a British soldier from the American War of Independence, and I go about with many other like-minded individuals, putting on public displays, performances, battle recreations, that sort of thing. I usually record them, throw them onto the channel, and then otherwise I will wear the uniform and talk about very lecture video type things. I'll talk about the life and times of the 18th century and mainly military history from a social perspective. At least that's the main conceit. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of videos on there, but it's mainly military history from a social perspective.
I have to say that that's actually how I found your channel. I dabble in reenacting myself, and I found your videos about what it's like to be a reenactor. And that's what got me to delve into your videos a bit deeper.
Fantastic. What's your impression? Actually, I didn't know you did.
Well, I don't so much any longer, but when I did Civil War Engineers, 50th New York.
Fantastic.
My friend Daryl Rivers does a giant reenactment out here in Southern California.
I am well familiar with Mr. Lord Rivers, I should say. He made I have a wonderful Victorian smoking cap on my top shelf here that he made for me.
He does some fantastic works, particularly with keeping living history alive in the area. And that was actually one question I had for you. Do you prefer the term living history or reenacting?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'd really say that I have a preference either way. I certainly think that both are accurate in terms of, the sentiment that they portray, if you will. Living history is perhaps a bit more of I won't say pretentious, but a kinder way of putting it. It's a bit more dignified seeming. It speaks a little bit to the intention of the entire affair, but then reenactment is also in the end, it's recreating the past. It's reenacting the things that happened. It's all basically the same thing.
I just find it fascinating from my point of view that I've heard a lot of switch to the term living history over reenacting.
When you say things like reenacting, I feel like there possibly is, and of course being in the community, I'm kind of removed from this perspective, so I can only say so much. But something tells me that a lot of people think of my mind always goes when I think of old style or old school reenactments, like way back when during say the 1970s, when everything was really, really inaccurate and it was all just kind of an excuse to shoot guns over the weekend and drink alcohol and not actually, whatever. I always associate old style, the stereotypes of reenactment with that old episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, where the dad is doing a Civil War reenactment and the sons drag themselves along because they want to spend time with him, and no one actually cares about the history. They're just having fun with it all. And I feel like maybe certain aspects of the community are trying to get away from those older ideas, because what reenactment is, it is an academic pursuit. It is a scholastic pursuit. It is living history. These people are living historians, at least the ones who are doing it very, very well certainly can be classified as such. It's become, I think, in recent years, a lot more dignified in this way. I know that others may disagree with me on that, but I certainly see an awful lot of educational value in it. It's not just a bunch of, middle-aged guys getting away from the wife for the weekend, drinking, beers in tents and then shooting guns at one another. It is a scholastic
Pursuit.
Yes, that's the word for it. Thank you. And maybe something like living history and referring to ourselves as living historians as opposed to just reenactors is a way to maybe expand or increase that dignity to maybe more accurately reflect where the hobby is going. But that is all pure conjecture. I just thought about that, so I could be completely wrong on that. Who knows? Maybe the term is equally common, in the past as it is now, but you get the idea.
From the impression I get, actually, that you seem to be spot on. But again, that's my anecdotal experiences. I want to get into reenacting deeper. But first, I want to talk about yourself a little bit.
Oh.
So what got you into history, if you can pin it to a moment or an event or something that was in your life?
So I can't really say that I would pin it to any one particular point, but I mean, my childhood, if you want to summarize it very, very simply, was trains, then it was dinosaurs, and then it was military history, which is kind of a very dramatic shift. But I think I would largely put it back to when I was very, very young, early formative years. Sitting like playing Mario 64 or whatever with my grandfather, and at the grandparents' house. Um, and slowly but surely, as we were spending an awful lot of time together, he informed a great deal of my upbringing. We would start watching, like television programs. And what did he always want to watch? What were the things that he watched on television? Well, he would watch the History Channel, and he would watch Discovery Channel. And, this is in the years when all those years ago, I'm 24 years old, all those years ago when the History Channel was at least somewhat decent, and they would show like World War II documentaries. It was all either, like religious wars and crusades, or it was World War II. That was the only thing that the History Channel ever did, or like ancient conflict. And as we were watching these old history documentaries. Of course, it was a bonding experience. It was a formative experience. And he would always give his pithy, his witty humor in response to everything that's happening on the screen and commenting on how, oh, people were so silly or people are so stupid, just traditional, you know, grandpa, grandson type talk. And I slowly, fell in love, I think, with the styles, with those more social, personal elements of military history, because he would oftentimes speak of not necessarily his own experiences as a soldier in Vietnam. He really doesn't talk an awful lot about those, but he would offer like those little glimpses in terms of like the soldier's perspective. He would he would talk about maybe the common guy's experience. He would be less interested in, oh, and then General, so and so ordered his men to do this. He would comment on, oh, those poor guys having to do the thing that the general told them to do. Sorry, I'm rambling on a bit there, I think, but that's a big part of it, is honestly just sitting down and watching those old documentaries with my grandfather. And then, of course, being, vaguely interested in history and in military history, then going into, like elementary school, like fifth grade is when they start really talking to us about, at least in my experience, the American War of Independence, which is obviously the big thing in my life now. And they would tell us the narrative of the horribly wrong narrative of the common man, the average militiaman, Joe Schmo, just fighting for what he believes in and hiding behind the rocks and the trees and using those irregular, smart tactics to beat back the evil empire, the robotic, the perfectly drilled and disciplined, evil British soldiers who each soldier required like 2 hours to get himself ready in the morning because he had all his powdered hair and the gold lacing and all these just ridiculous stereotypes. But looking at those stereotypes and all the old movies that they'd show us in class, being like, oh, this is how they actually used to fight. I was completely enamored with just with the style of it all, with the robotization of the army and whatnot. I thought it was just fascinating. And that carried on, for a good couple of years. And then slowly but surely, as I got older and, I learned more about the conflict, I realized literally none of that was true. And, but even still, the seed was planted, I suppose, and it was all downhill from there, as I basically had to unlearn everything that I learned and then relearn it all. And well, here we are now, a hopeless Anglophile who, yes, well, can't even watch a movie without complaining the entire time.
I do have to say, I truly enjoy your nitpicking.
Well, thank you. It is all in good fun. After all, it is largely it's self-aware. I'm being a little facetious whenever I complain about, oh, that man isn't standing right. I mean, obviously that doesn't matter too much, but it's good fun, I think.
Indeed. And, a lot of these guys, frankly, it's kind of cool to have these things pointed out, because even if you are a historian, someone else might notice something you overlooked.
Yeah, and honestly, that is the way that I try to think about that. Whenever I make a video that's literally just 30 minutes complaining about a 5-minute scene in a movie about how the soldiers aren't standing right and how they're not marching right and how they're not using the right commands and da da da. It's like none of these things ultimately matter. I genuinely think what matters in historical film is if they respect the time period that they're looking at. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter if they say make ready or take aim. What matters is do they respect the history. But I do think that when I make the video, which is just me sitting there screeching on for 5 minutes about how horribly wrong it all is, I like to think that it's an entertaining format that will actually drive some genuine knowledge into people, and it might inspire them to, do a little bit more reading on their own in a bit more of a purely academic fashion as opposed to entertainment alongside academic.
And I think you actually do make that very clear in those videos that that is what you're doing, a combination of education and entertainment.
Hmm.
So, how did you get into reenacting then?
Well, honestly, that one I can trace back fairly simply to a single moment. I was working out in the lawn, not something I usually do, as you can imagine, but a friend of mine, basically, and I, back when I was living in Ohio, I was in like 11th or 12th grade, I think. Yeah, I was a senior in high school, I think. We were just like moving some wood at the end of the year, like from the front of the house to the back of the house, because I guess I don't know. We had a fireplace, and it was turning summertime, and my mother thought it was like the worst thing in the world if we had the wood still in the front of the house where we kept it when we were actually using the fireplace because it looked, I guess, horribly ghastly. So we needed to have it moved to the rear of the home lest the public see that we keep ourselves warm during the winter. So we're going about our work, which I don't know why I told you this story about the work itself because it's completely irrelevant, but I was entertained. We're going about the work, and my friend, who was really interested in the American Civil War and like 19th century American history, he had recently become a reenactor. He had just gone out and come back from his first reenactment, which I think was the second Manassas. It was the second Manassas reenactment, I think. Union reenactor he was. And he's never been much of a talker as far as like telling war stories and whatnot. But I kept on like pushing him like this has to be like the coolest experience that you've ever done. How could it not be? Like you were in the 19th century fighting in a line. Like tell me more about this. And he's like, well, Brandon, if you're like so interested in, you know, in that world and like you think it's so cool, then well, why don't you do it yourself? I'm like, oh, I can do it myself. And he's like, yeah, you like the British military. Why don't you look into doing that? I'm like, oh, I can look into doing that. So I went online. I desperately searched around for any reenactment group in my area, which unfortunately in, like what, 14, 20 thereabouts, 20, no, 2013. In 2013, unfortunately, it was a rather difficult thing to do because the Brigade of the American Revolution, the organization I'm a part of now, was at that point in time rather behind in terms of technology. They didn't have a website up, for example. Well, they didn't have an up-to-date website. And it was also a lot, unfortunately, of reenactment groups as well hadn't yet caught on to like Facebook as the big recruitment driver. So it was rather difficult to find groups in my area. But eventually I managed to find one group that actually had a website. It's kind of an old website, but it was a website. It's like, oh, perfect. And they actually had a company of guys in Ohio, and that was the 23rd Regiment of Foot. So I reach out to them. They had bearskin caps, which is like what I was looking for at the time. I was like, I don't care what the impression is. I just want a bearskin because they look great. So I send out an email. I find myself driving out to some of their events to, meet some of the guys, talk to them and everything. Yeah, and that was basically how I got involved. They helped me to get started with everything. I purchased my first uniform, which of course is quite a complicated process because it's all coming from different sources and everything. Yeah, and then I had my first ever reenactment in I want to say it was 2014 because it was like just coming out of high school, which was in New Jersey. I actually um, I drove out to Massachusetts because I have some family out here. Then altogether we drove down to New Jersey. I did the reenactment on Saturday. Yeah, and it was all. And again, once more, it was all downhill from there to what I am today.
Well, I do have to say, that should be an inspiration to anyone listening that wants to get into reenacting, because here you are, just, 4 or 5 short years later, And you're an old salt at this.
Yes, I mean it's funny honestly, and I try to make this known to like whenever in the 54th, which is the group that I'm with now, whenever we have a new member, you can always kind of tell like at their first event that they're not completely comfortable with it. You know, like the clothing is kind of awkward on them. They're paranoid that they're getting things wrong. Um, they're paranoid that they don't like look as comfortable and everything as all the other guys do and whatnot. I try to show it like that's very regular, I think. I mean, I look back at my first ever reenactment and I just cringe. Like I look at the photographs like, oh my God. It's like I didn't realize at that point that I think I look much better as an individual without my glasses, which unfortunately I'm pretty much blind. I have to have my glasses on all the time. But I didn't realize, that I can probably get away with being a bit blind in reenactment because I'm only an enlisted man. I just follow the orders after all. And I think makes me look a bit older, makes me look a lot better, more soldier-like, if you will.
Hmm.
The clothing was all very loose on me. I had to cinch things up. The belting was a bit too long, things like that. I had the biggest, cheesiest grin on my face in all the pictures because, I was excited to be there. I was having a great time. It was a very new experience. But now looking back, it's like, oh God, no, it looks silly. The big old smile. I'm very young and everything. My wig came undone like halfway through the battle, so I had my cue trailing behind me instead of tucked under the bearskin as that should be. In fairness, all, or at least mostly, like little things that non-reenactors probably wouldn't care about, but like to me now, looking back, it's like, oh, I was such a farb. I was so inaccurate. But it's what I tell people is like, no matter what you do, your first event, you're not going to be completely comfortable with it, but over time, you'll learn how the clothing is worn. You'll grow into it a little bit better. The clothing, in fact, will stretch and contort to your body much more ably because that wool clothing, it's tight when you first get a new like pair of breeches, for example. It's very difficult to fit into them. You'll learn like honestly, you'll learn when the photographer is looking at you and what sort of glance you want to shoot his way to look all dramatic and everything. You get more used to the environment and you'll enjoy yourself a lot more as you do. It's a process of getting used to the whole thing, which it took me a while, but now it's good fun.
Yeah, I don't think anyone should ever be afraid of trying to get into reenacting. If they have any sort of interest, it seems like groups are incredibly welcoming.
Oh yes, no, absolutely. I mean, honestly, no matter what the group that I found, in different time periods in different regions, from Ohio out here to Massachusetts, and even when I go down to events like in New Jersey or New York or even the Carolinas with some World War II events I've done, like no matter what I found. That these are some of the most welcoming, some of the most kind-hearted individuals. Don't talk about politics all the time because people can get pretty intense about that sort of thing. But that's with any community that you find out there. Um, no, it's an incredibly kind and welcoming community overall because it's just basically it's a bunch of people with a shared passion and with an interest in sharing that passion with each other and with the world. Um, I if I want to get mushy, I can say that joining the reenactment hobby has so completely, so thoroughly, so utterly changed my life, and so much for the better. I mean, if I look at myself, like in high school, for example, it's not like I was antisocial, but I was shy. I was a very shy individual. I had a small number of very close friends, but I saw them at school, and then after school, I was done with my socialization. It's like, all right, I just want to play video games on the internet and talk with my friends there. And I led a very quiet, very secure, very very sheltered, if you will, life. That's a good way to put it. A very sheltered life. But the reenactment hobby really it started putting me in more outgoing situations. It started having me get introduced to all sorts of new, different people from all over the place, from a variety of different backgrounds and settings. It had me, thrust into the limelight of these public performances and displays where all the eyes are on you, so you got to do something, otherwise it just kind of looks funny. Where people are walking up and asking you questions, and people are saying, "Hey, can I take a photograph with you?" and everything. It really made me a more sociable person. It made me more, what's the word for it? Gregarious? Is that the word for it?
That is a word for it.
Yeah, it's a word for it. Yes. It socially basically made me a lot more outgoing and I think kind and um, tolerable in a way. Again, some people may disagree, but that's the way I see it.
Just a piece of advice I have for anyone else, and I want to see if you back me up on this. Go to as many events as you can. You really want to form those bonds with those people rather than staying aloof. And you do want to participate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the worst thing you can do if you join a reenactment group is, only see the guys once a year at the same event in the same situation. Um, it's so much of it is it's not just about even the events themselves. Not only go to every single event you can, but it's at least in the case of my reenactment group, the 54th, we have regular drills together. At least like once or twice a month, we'll meet to practice everything. But that's a social gathering is what it is. It's like a little party. We'll all go over to our leader's house. It's Steve. He'll put some burgers on the grill. Listen to music. We'll all hang out, and we'll also do our drilling. But it's basically like a little party every time we do it. We do plenty as well, like social events as far as like hiking. Like we actually had a timeline hike not that long ago where everyone just wore whatever reenactment clothing they wanted to. I actually showed up in my World War II stuff. Some guys showed up in World War One, and we took a hike around the woods. These are like social clubs is a good way to put it, and it is an inherently social hobby. If you're only in it because if you think to yourself, oh, I hate the people that are involved, but I really want to be in the battles or whatever, then you're going to miss out on the most important part of the hobby and probably the most beneficial part of the hobby. You're not going to enjoy yourself as much, and that's why it's so important. Yeah, that not only when you join are you able to actually do that commitment of getting out to the events, of getting out to the drills and interacting with these people, it's also so extraordinarily important, as you say, to get out to those events, not only when you're in the hobby, but before you involve yourself in the hobby. You want to attend as many events as you can, like at least two or three, I'd say. You want to talk with as many groups as you possibly can. The worst thing you can do when you're looking at getting involved in the reenactment hobby is look at one group, for example, and say, oh wow, that impression is really cool. Like I like their uniform, I like the way they look, and because of that, that's the group I'm going to join. It's like, but you don't know who's in that group. You don't know. You want to be able to join a group that you'll get along with, that they have a similar philosophy in the hobby as you do. People that you, oh God, I'm going to use a word that I absolutely despise right now, but it's the best way I can think of it. A group that you jive well with, as it were. I feel dirty after that, but you get the idea. It's so important that you enjoy your time with those people, that you can come to love them as friends and as brothers and whatnot. That it's not just
Showing up for the performance.
yeah, exactly. It's not just people that you work with. It's people that you are socializing with on a regular basis. So make sure you like them. Sorry, I'm long-winded, but that's the basis of it. That's the point.
That's what this is for. I'm going to keep us on track, but I'm going to let you ramble as much as you want.
All right, I'll do my best to get us off track.
So, actually, you brought up something that I'm curious about. Mm-hmm. You said that you reenact World War II, and I know that you do a Soviet impression. What inspired that?
So I'm afraid the story there is not anywhere near so... Well, I was going to say exciting, but I don't think any of them really been exciting. It's not anywhere near so long. Perhaps that's fortunate. Quite simply, that first friend who got me into reenacting to start with by telling me some stories about it. He basically just said to me one day, he's like, I kind of want to get into World War II. Like, would you be interested in doing that? Like, I kind of want to do Soviet. I'm interested in Russian history. I'm like, I guess so. I don't really know anything about the Eastern Front, but I'd like to learn more. How much does it cost? He's like, I think like $500 for the basic impression. I'm like, heckin', I'm in. Yes. Because I was used to like a $2,500 impression with my Rev War stuff, and that's for like the basic kit. Soviet being really cheap, it's like, yeah, sure, I'll pick it up. Why not? I was like a cashier at a grocery store. It's like, yeah, it's like 2 weeks of work or whatever, and I'm there.
Some Germans spend that on their boots.
Oh God, yeah, no, it's ridiculous. And in fairness, um, the impression that I had going into the Russian kit was not necessarily fair because while unfortunately a lot of people do treat their Soviet impressions as like the cheap throwaway on the side secondary impression, if you do Russian correctly, if you do it right, if you do it really well, it can also, much like every other impression, really get up there in terms of cost. But even to this day, I do have a fairly, I admit, bare bones Russian impression. Like I have the minimum stuff required to get involved. Um, but it is still, fairly cheap. Although Mosins are getting pretty expensive nowadays. It's like, when I bought mine for like 130 bucks, I thought that I was like overpaying. But now people are saying like, oh, 200, 300 bucks. And I don't know. It's a crazy world out there. But
I've seen an incredibly rusted out one, which I will mention I bought for 350.
no, oh my God. What year was it? Do you know?
Ah, it's a Westinghouse.
Okay. Fair enough.
So the fact that it's an American Mosin, I just had to pick it up.
Okay, no, that's understandable then. But even still, it's like the nature of it is. Ugh, I shudder to think of spending anything more than like, chump
$100
change
or
in terms
so,
of
yeah.
firearms. Yeah, for a Mosin,
I,
like the
I
gun,
remember.
the gun that just works.
They're all right. I remember they were doing a deal at Big Five once.
Mhm.
Two Mosin Nagats for $89.
Oh my God. As I say, it reminds me of the people who would like just buy entire cratefuls of the things from the Ukraine. It's like, oh, we found a warehouse just filled with Mosins. Who wants to buy a crate of Mosins for like $800? It's like 20 of them. It's like, all right, sure.
My coffee table in a living room is one of those crates. Empty, of course, but
It's fantastic. I love that.
um well, okay. And frankly, the Russian side of the war is something that's not really told in the US, and if it is, it's almost exclusively told wrong.
Yeah, it is. And I find actually, and honestly, like, this is something that I found very interesting going into like World War II reenactment, which I don't really do as much of. It's not as much of a passion. It's more of like one or two events every year, and mainly because I have friends who do it, and I am interested in learning more, of course, and I do learn an awful lot more at every event that I attend. But it was an example of my not going in thinking, oh right, well I know a little bit about this time period, and I want to help to correct these false narratives. I went in thinking, oh yeah, the Russians just like ran at the Germans and there were just a whole bunch of them. That's why they won, right? Right? Because I never thought about it before. And honestly, I was shown like in ninth grade in high school. It was the only time they ever talked about the Eastern Front. Heaven forbid we talk about the like what largest conflicts, one of the largest conflicts ever fought in human history. And they showed us Enemy at the Gates. I'm like, yeah, that's historical. Just like I shudder to think now. But I went in with basically zero knowledge. I knew nothing about the Soviet war machine. I knew nothing about the German strategies going into it. I knew nothing about. I knew a little bit about the war crimes visited on either side, but I had no idea how bad it truly was. I knew almost nothing about the conflict, and it was an experience not only to where I was able to at every single event, maybe help to teach people about things as I learned. Obviously, I wasn't teaching before I learned it this myself, but to where I was immediately basically surrounded by a bunch of other people, young people, passionate, enthusiastic people who knew an awful lot about the time period. And I was just able to, it was an incredibly rich environment. I was able to just absorb so much information. And it showed me so quickly how utterly wrong everything that I thought I knew was about the conflict. Mainly, yeah, again, that things like Enemy at the Gates were not actually what happened. I feel like I forgot the original question, but yeah, that was an
No,
interesting experience.
there wasn't a question, it was a statement. But I actually want to ask you, do you ever watch Tick?
No, actually. So I've seen the video that you're talking about Order 227. Was it
Oh,
227?
he has a whole mess of
Yeah.
videos.
I see him recommended to me all the time. I have yet to watch any of his videos, which I know that I need to. It's on the list. I need to actually sit down and do it at some point.
If you ever want to see just large numbers of large numbers of detailed graphs about pig iron, he's your man.
What more could you want in life?
But I think that he gives a really great explanation as to the Soviet point of view of the war. But anyway, yeah, it's fascinating that doesn't get talked about too much here. We don't talk too much about the Japanese side either.
Yeah,
We're
which is
frankly,
surprising considering how relevant it is to American history. You'd think that we would be honestly far more interested in the Japanese side of things than in the German side of things because the Japanese were here. They act, they were much more of a threat, so to say, than the Germans ever were.
and that still shows in the military shows and stuff of that nature. If you ever go, Japanese stuff is still cheaper than American or German.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, um, just something of an aside, but in my mind, Imperial Japanese Army is like the one forbidden impression that I'll never be able to do properly. Because like I don't have any problem whatsoever in any capacity with people doing reenactment impressions that are not like racially appropriate. Like a white
Indeed.
guy doing a white guy doing a IJA. I don't have a problem with that in any way. But it's also like, but I'll never be completely authentic. Like that would always be in the back of my mind. So it's like the forbidden impression.
I'll throw this kinda out to you, mostly because I'm looking for more information on this. There's this concept that I heard of the German Tropical Corps. Now, I've heard a lot of people imply that towards the Africa Corps, that they were called the Tropical Corps. But I went to a military convention once, and there was a man giving a lecture about 1,000 German soldiers that were stranded in Japan for the duration of the war.
Really?
And I've never heard anyone else anywhere mention that.
That is I've never heard about this. That is very interesting though.
I don't know if it's.
It sounds like a bad movie.
I was going to say, I have no idea if it's true or not, but there was a man giving a lecture on it.
No, I'm afraid I can't give you any details on that, but that's something I'm gonna have to look into.
I tried to track it down because I met a man whose brother served in Japan during the war, and he was a German. So I went and talked to him about the Tropical Corps, and he said no, that the man was just with U-boats. But I want to put this little story out into the ether just because I think it's pertinent. The man, during the duration of the war, married a Japanese woman in 1944. This woman was 6'4" tall. A Japanese woman in 1944, 6'4". And so I said, why did the man marry her? Just out of curiosity, because it's an unusual thing. And the man responded, well, my brother's 7'2".
Oh, of course, of course.
I'm like,
Wait,
okay.
wait, and you said he was a submariner, or
That was my question. I was hoping you'd pick up on that.
yeah?
He was in supplies. He was at a U-boat base. He never
Oh,
actually
okay,
served
okay,
on the ships
okay.
themselves. Yeah,
Oh God.
that's a story
That,
that deserves to be
yes.
told.
Honestly, yes, that's a fantastic story. But and honestly, like not to go from the highly entertaining and personal, but to the impersonal and historical, but just that idea you're like talking about a U-boat base in Japan, like that idea, that concept of how the Axis powers were interacting with one another, particularly the Japanese and the Germans, who both like in my mind just epitomize like chaotic evil as far as like if you could have D&D alignments with nation states, Imperial Japan is chaotic evil in so many ways. And how these governments, how these nations who were both, at least certainly in the case of the Germans, their entire shtick was based around their being racially superior to all others, and then the Japanese just had their own crazy ideology going on as well. Like how these two were working together, how they were allies, but how just the entire dynamic is very interesting. I always find it very well summarized in the fact that the Japanese in Nanking were going just so horrible with everything that the hero of Nanking, John Rabe, was a Nazi, and how even the Nazi government ended up contacting, as I understand it, the Imperial Japanese government, saying like, "Hey guys, maybe you should like calm down on the war crimes a little bit," which is like when Nazi Germany is telling you to maybe calm it down, you're really messing stuff up. And so I feel like as well that dynamic of these of these German soldiers in Imperial Japan, like as you say at submarine bases, or this like these like 1,000-man corps. Like that sounds like a fascinating dynamic, and I'd love to see more about how they interacted socially within these spaces, within these environments, with these locals, because of just how, again, hyper militant both societies are running up against one another.
Well, it couldn't have been too bad if, a German and a Japanese woman ended up getting married.
And how, the locals would have perceived that, is how her family would have seen the action, maybe how the other guys would have, razzed him about what's going on. It's definitely something to look more into.
Especially while the people are still alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Absolutely.
I was actually just talking with my father about this. My father was in Germany during World War II. My family's from Prussia. We got stranded in Poland during or after World War One, and then came to the United States after World War II.
Oh.
And he was talking about. I totally got. I totally got derailed by that.
Somewhere in there.
No idea where I was going with that. But that actually does remind me, I've been getting my very few negative comments on my very tiny channel have been people saying I've been too hard on Germany.
I mean,
I haven't said anything on the subject, period.
well, that's the thing. That's the thing. At least in my experience. If you dare to even mention like a historical situation in which Germany was present, like in which there was at least a Germanic nation present in the world, and you do not give your due reverences to the militant demigods that were the Prussians, then you will be hailed as every negative thing under the sun. I have had so very many people accuse me of I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this. That thing where people like put parentheses around people's names saying like, oh, he's part of the evil Jewish conspiracy to take over the whole world and whatnot. I've seen an awful lot of that sort of thing. And of course, and not only that, but like I'll make a video about, the American War of Independence or whatever, and people ask like, oh, like what was Prussia doing at this time? It's like, I don't know. It's
not your channel.
Not relevant. Yeah. No. And people say like, oh, make a video about Prussia this and Prussia that. It's like, honestly, it's the German military and the Karelians, which I'm convinced is just because of Sabaton. People are disordinately fascinated by, I think. Now I say this, of course, as an individual who is vastly disordinately interested in the British military, but it's people feel very, very passionate about German military history. I'm not sure what causes it. I'm not sure why, but they will get very passionate. And if you dare to mention that Germany ever did something wrong outside of World War II, which is like the one place where people can't really defend them as well, then you will be lambasted for it. You will be attacked for it. And then occasionally I'll say something partially as a meme, partially as a joke, but also being a little serious. I'll just say things like, Germany was a mistake. And then you just watch the comments roll on in.
Well, again, speaking as, an ancestor of, the Germans who moved here, my dad survived. I remembered where that story was going. My father survived World War II. My grandfather lost all of his brothers fighting in the war. All to the Russians, even though some of
were, yeah.
Even some of them who fought for Poland.
The Russians were hardly a kind peoples, is the thing.
Well, and then that's the other funny thing is my dad has nothing but kind things to say about the Russians he met during the war.
Well, I mean, that's nice.
Oh, everyone's an individual.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
But I just did have this story to say in terms of strange encounters. We were at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., and there was this World War II bomber pilot that was there visiting the memorial. And my dad walked up to him and said, so you fought in World War II? And he said, yes, I flew planes. And then he said, what did you do? And he said, well, specifically, I was a bomber pilot. My dad looks down at him and says, you didn't get me.
You gotta love the gallows humor.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine having to go through that, but I'm just trying to say that, if my dad, who experienced this, can kind of let these things go.
Yeah, that you think people on the internet,
Yeah.
60, 70 years later would be able to do the same thing, but unfortunately not. People feel the need to defend others on their behalf and whatnot. It's quite common, but
Well, I do feel like we're a bit too much in the political weeds. I try to keep this channel political free, um,
fair enough.
swearing free, and not to disparage anyone. So let's get back into you. What's your favorite historical site?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Hmm. Well, it's going to be something in the UK.
Okay.
What a shocker. I dare say, oh, what's the one place? Whenever I'm over in the UK, maybe I'll answer it in this way, which is a bit of a workaround, but it might still answer it in a way. Whenever I go to the UK, I always make my little pilgrimages to a number of sites. No matter how many times I see it, I always revisit these sites. I always revisit the White Cliffs of Dover every time, usually actually multiple times in any one trip. I always will attend at least one evensong service in Westminster Abbey.
Oh wow.
Gorgeous location. I think it's the most beautiful in the entire country. I mean, whenever I'm in the UK, I go to Evensong every night, just usually to different places. Um, I always visit, obviously, Horse Guards and Buckingham Palace. I typically view at least one of the parades that they have there every day, usually the 4 o'clock parade because it's an easy one to get to at Horse Guards. Um, and then, of course, I have all the different parades and military ceremonies and everything at Horse Guards. Um, Oh, and there's also, no matter how, the fact that it's rather out of the way on my usual like routes that I like to visit, but I absolutely adore, and honestly it probably is among at least my absolute favorites, the Prince Albert Memorial in Hyde Park, which is right across from the Albert Hall. The memorial, the monument, if you've ever seen it, I can only say like just do a search for it to see what it looks like. It is a monument to everything that the Victorians saw themselves as. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's very very tall. In the center of the thing is a massive like golden statue of Prince Albert sitting on a throne, which is just you know imperial hero in every way you can imagine. Um, like the idea of it, not necessarily him being one, but the idea of the imperial hero as a Victorian phenomena. Um, and he is surrounded by portrayals. First, on the four corners of this memorial, there are basically a bunch of statues and monuments to the various aspects of the empire. So there's one for the American colonies, there's one for the European holdings, there's one for, I believe it was the Indian holdings, and then there's one for the African holdings. And each of these is represented by like a series of people and animals and figures, representing those aspects of the dominions. And then just underneath Prince Albert, like um, wrapping around like the base of his statue are basically every philosopher, every engineer, every scientist, like everyone of importance to like Victorian ideals has a little like carving of themselves, and they're all these people, like everyone from like Socrates to Isaac Newton, are interacting with one another. Like they're sitting down at the tables and having conversations. They're showing each other like their doodads and whatnot. Or at least they're like showing writings to each other and whatnot. They're all like interacting with one another in this just massive what's the word for it? What's that painting with all the philosophers?
Oh, isn't it just the Philosopher's School?
Yes, actually, yeah, or like the School of Athens or something like that. It's
Yes.
basically like that, but it's like modern and it's Victorian ideals, which is just fascinating to watch. Like, how all these people are interacting with each other on like the screen, if you will, on this memorial. And then there's also on the four corners of the thing, alongside like the Dominion statues, there's also four displays, if you will, of agriculture, of manufacturing, of science, and what's the fourth one? I think just like industry or something vague like that. But basically, all of the most stereotypical Victorian ideals you can imagine, just exemplified in the most triumphalist and Whiggish fashion you can ever imagine. Like, it's so unabashed and so unacknowledging of the problems of that time period. It's a fascinating look because it is all just a massive monument, a memorial to one man. It's saying this is the Prince Albert Memorial. It's not the Empire Memorial. It's not, the Victorian Memorial. It's for Prince Albert. It's a dedication to one man and through one man of an entire way of life, an entire way of looking at the world. It's I can talk about that one for an hour. It's by far like among my favorite memorials and monuments, which I'm very passionate about. And it's one site that I always make sure that I visit whenever I'm in that country.
So I'm actually going to pose the question to you again because I think that was a fantastic answer. But I want to know historical site, meaning where a point where something historical happened.
Okay. No, that's also very good because just because it is historical doesn't necessarily mean it's a site, as you say. Um,
Though I feel blessed to have heard that diatribe from you. And I feel
I
disappointed that
get
I
carried
didn't.
away.
I spent over a month in London proper and over 6 months in the UK, and I never saw that memorial.
Oh, it's next time you're out there, make sure you take a peek. Um, but then in fairness as well, I'm the kind of pretentious that can give a similar diatribe on pretty much any memorial, no matter what.
All right, go for it on the war animals.
Oh god, no, war animal. Oh, I don't
Did you see
remember
that
any
memorial?
details. Yes, with the horse like going through the center with all the
Mm-hmm.
pack animals and the elephant. Oh, it's gorgeous. Um, Not my favorite necessarily like, subject material because I don't, it's animals and whatnot. It's nice, but it's not, the suffering of a beast of burden will always be, secondary to the suffering of mankind. But it's still a beautiful piece. No, but I'm gonna ask the original question because
Indeed,
otherwise
indeed.
we'll never get around to it otherwise. Um, Honestly, probably Westminster Abbey
Ah,
because it's kind of cheating in that like a bunch of historical things happened and continue to happen there. But honestly, um, I'm not a Christian. I do not live with theology or with any sort of religiosity, if you will. Um, and as such, there are very few places and there are very few moments when I am able, as an individual, to feel the sense of almost divine awe and a sense of mystery and a sense of wonderment. And again, awe is the best way to describe it at the world around me, at the forces at work and whatnot. I'm not an atheist, but again, I'm not a Christian. And Westminster Abbey is one of the few places, as in fairness, most English cathedrals truly, but Westminster Abbey more than any of the others. It's one of those few places where I can sit down in that little, slot that they put you into, where I can listen to the music that's being sung, and look around, look into the stained glass windows, and see the faces of the past, of these saints and various British public figures staring down at me, where I can see in the corners the monuments and memorials and the tombs, in fact, of these figures that I read so often about. Just again, looking into my very soul, to put it artistically, where I can look over and see the spot, the very place where Queen Elizabeth II herself was crowned as queen. It's one of those places where I feel the weight of history and of all of the things that happened there, things that I don't even know about, things even that aren't necessarily historical in terms of like, oh, this battle and this hero and this person did this thing, but just a place of every single day for the past however many, I mean, thousands if we want to talk about like the site itself being used for religious purposes. But as far as the building, for the past, like 150 or however many years since Westminster Abbey has been built, just where I can sit down and feel the full weight of those traditions happening continually through the past and hopefully through the future as well. It connects me to that history. And again, I feel the full weight of that past just sort of weighing down on me, but in the most delightful fashion. It's sort of, I look at all those figures, staring down at me from the stained glass window, sort of saying, Brandon, what have you done with your life so far? What have you done to support all of this? It's like, I'm doing my best. I'm sorry, guys. But, it's nice. It's pleasant. And of course, again, it's the place where coronations are had. It's a place where a nation comes together to celebrate, to mourn, to everything else in between.
And I think that actually leads us very nicely into my next set of questions about what you are doing. Because I think what you're doing is quite important.
Well,
Let's talk about your channel. How did you get started with YouTube?
well, way back when I was but a simple little freshman in in university, studying history, I did. I would basically watch people like Lindy Beige and the Metatron and Scholagrim and Shadiversity and Schola Gladiatoria, and as well like a few like less persona based and more like just straight up history channels. People who do things like what the Armchair Historian now does. He's a friend of mine. He was doing it back then, but people like that. And I would look at their channels and be like, I I I can do that. That looks like fun. I should be able to, I can do that sort of thing. I was mainly inspired, honestly, by people like Schola Gladiatoria, the Metatron, and Shadiversity, because I saw them like having a style that I could I feel like I could do well with it. Lindy Beige would just like stand up and go for like an hour without any break at all. It's like I need jump cuts. I can't do that.
I feel Lindy Beige is what we all try to live up to.
Yes, exactly. As far as just that titan of a personality. But I was looking at these examples of these other people doing these things. I'm like, I can do this stuff. I have opinions. I can talk about things. And I would also sit down and listen to my professor lecture, and I'd listen to his lecture and be like, this is compelling. I could make my first idea was like I could make a video where like I talk about the entire history of such and such in 10 minutes, and I very rapidly realized that's not my style. That would be horrible. That would not be entertaining in any way, because I have a tendency of going on about very little things for 50 minutes.
Which is why and I'm sure a lot of your fans enjoy your content.
Yeah. It's a very niche audience, but it is, I think it's a strong one, which I appreciate. And I also, by virtue of also starting to get involved with reenactment, which by that point I had done it for like a year or thereabouts, I was thinking to myself, like, maybe I could, yeah, I could integrate that. Like I can wear the outfit and I can talk about, some of the things that I've learned, some common misconceptions. Some of the first videos I made were like, did the British wear red to hide blood? Like, well, no, they didn't. Things like that. And then I also I realized as well, like, oh, maybe what my first video that I have uploaded on the channel at the moment is actually my first attempt at recording a reenactment. I got like a really tiny like little pen camera. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. The quality of it was just absolutely horrible. It was like the audio was. It was a very old camera, to put it very, very simply, and it was not good technology. But I keep the videos up there for the memory of it, I suppose, where I came from. So that's basically how I started. Is I thought to myself, I could do what these other people do. It looks like a lot of fun, and hey, maybe I'll make a job out of it one day. It's, not likely. It took me about a year to even get to 100 subscribers. And I actually still have an old update video when I first moved to the UK for my master's degree, which was a few years after getting started with everything, or like a year actually, thereabouts after getting started with everything, a little under, where I am sitting down in my dorm room, and I set up my GoPro camera, because in those early days, my first ever videos were all recorded on a GoPro, because I only had one camera. So they're like fisheye lenses as I'm giving a lecture. And I'm sitting there, I'm saying like, and I know that I only have 86 subscribers, but gosh darn it, that's an awful lot to me. And I was genuinely in awe at the idea, because I would think back to my professor, and I think back to Dr. Such and Such in university giving a lecture to a class of like 30 students, thinking that like, that's a big classroom, and thinking like, I have a classroom of 80 people. That's like, wow. Because what I had always wanted to do, what I wanted to be when I was younger, is a teacher or a professor. And that to me was kind of like, I already am doing that. I'm kind of doing that job. I am a professor in a way, and I have a pretty heckin' big audience. And I can make videos. I can talk about whatever I want to. I can make videos about the American War of Independence. I can talk about politics if I want to. Not that I ever do, really. Sometimes I make political bait videos, but that's beside the point. Second Amendment type things. But it was a big classroom, and that's what inspired me to keep going. Is I would always imagine myself giving the lecture in front of the people, and then it eventually took off, and here we are now. I have no idea if I even answered your question, but that was a bit of a
No,
rant. There you go.
that was perfect. I
I'll take
really,
it.
I really do like the concept, and I've been noticing that more and more as I've been integrating into the YouTube community. I'm quite happy with my 65 subscribers.
And um, I don't mean to imply like I don't know if it came across earlier as when I said like a mere 86 or like if I made that seem diminutive or small in any way in relation to where we are now, but I mean it is on its own merits, and I say this to people all the time who ask me for like advice getting started, like people who have 50 subscribers, people who have 20 subscribers, if it's not all their family members, like that is extraordinarily impressive. That is insanely impressive because what that represents is, in your case, suppose I'm sorry, 65.
Mhm.
65 individuals, 65 people who thought to themselves, I want to hear more of what this person has to say. For one reason or another, I am interested in this person's perspective, which is infinitely more. If you have one person subscribed to your channel, that is infinitely more than the grand majority of people on this planet will ever have. By having 65, you are in, like the top whatever percentile, like a significant percentile there. And it only goes up. There's an audience for everything, and I am convinced that you will go up as well. It's a bit of a long process. It's a very long grind, but it will happen. And that it is an extraordinary, achievement in that way.
Well, that was the thing that I kind of wanted to loop this back into, and I appreciate your kind words. And no, I didn't take your comment as anything.
God, thank
Um,
you.
it's it's been incredibly welcoming to be in this community. Like I said, I've had you on and Potential History on and Sudium, and you guys are all giants compared to where I am, but you guys treat me with respect, and it's been an awe-inspiring experience.
It's funny as well, as you say that, as referring to me as anything close to a significant figure, which still kind of boggles my mind because it doesn't feel that way. Never really does feel that way. Because I look at my friend, I look at my friend, the armchair historian, I look at Lindy Page, I look at Metatron, like, oh God, I'm pitifully small. I'm nothing. But then I know that a year ago I was looking at people my size and thinking, oh man, one of these days I'll get there. It's all in proportion, and it can be very difficult to keep that in mind, that whether you have, and let this go out to everyone out there, whether you have 5 subscribers or, 500,000, but no matter what, that is, again, an extraordinary and potentially a beautiful, a wonderful thing if you use it for good. Can be a horrible thing, but you get the idea. It's a mind-boggling thing in so many ways, no matter what that number is. Um, that you have that a little level of influence in a way.
Indeed, indeed. I think that was a beautiful summation of that topic. I have two more questions written down.
All right.
They are: how soon is too soon to reenact, and what do you want to write a book on if you want to?
Oh, all right. We'll go in order then you ask then. Because actually, I do get asked that question a fair bit. How soon is too soon to reenact? It's never too soon. The youngest member of any reenactment group that I've ever interacted with, her name is Hazel. She's a favorite in the Brigade of the American Revolution, the young daughter of Mr. John Lopez, who's our president, our peerless commander, our brigadier, as it were. She is just now beginning to speak,
Wow.
like in general. And she, she can be a little farb sometimes because she'll bring a bottle or like a binky or something like that if need be. It's like, all right, whatever, farb. But also, oh, farb incidentally means historically inaccurate in the reenactment community for people who may not know. No, but her mother had made up for her basically a period appropriate like baby's dress or gown. Like I don't know what they're called, but like those smock, very loose fitting, very light, very airy garments that children used to wear. And she'll take her to reenactments, and of course she's a favorite among everyone. I feel rather bad for the child, realizing that, oh dear, she's going to be growing up thinking that this is like a normal thing that people do instead of the most strange and niche of hobbies ever. Like, what do you mean your dad doesn't, dress up in a massive hat and blue uniform every Sunday and pretend to shoot at Americans? But um, she's an integral, she's a fantastic part of the reenactment community. And what's more is, of course, she's also an educational tool. She's not just hanging around, with her mother, but people will walk up and see like, oh my God, that's a baby at a reenactment. Like, what's going on there? Like, why is this baby in an army camp? All of a sudden, you're talking about camp followers. You're talking about the role of civilians in the military. You're talking about the advantageous, the desirable state of being a civilian in the military as opposed to being left behind by all these different things. You're talking about childcare, child rearing in the 18th century. You're talking about the fact that childhood, like as an idea, is more or less a Victorian invention as far as like having a fun childhood instead of one of suffering. You get the idea. It's, she is a valued member of the reenactment community, and she doesn't even know what the word reenactment means. Now, a bit more realistically talking, if you're someone who's looking at getting involved on your own, you don't have a parent that's been in the hobby for however many years, the most important thing, the most difficult thing to keep in mind is it can be a very expensive hobby, a couple $1,000 up to get started with everything, although it depends on your impression, of course, and sometimes groups have lender equipment, which is why it's above all else very important to talk with groups if you're interested in getting involved. Even if you're thinking you can't get involved yet, still talk to people. Get your name out there. Start looking around. It's the most important thing you can do, the best thing you can do. But there is the economic concern. There's also, of course, travel. It can be very difficult. You need to get yourself to those events for the reasons we were talking about earlier. You want to try and get yourself to as many as possible. And oftentimes this involves a great deal of traveling. I hate driving. I hate travel. I like being in places. I don't like trying to get there. And yet I've put like almost 30,000 miles on my car in like the last year and a half. There's a lot of travel involved in reenactment. Usually, no matter where you are, if there's an event that's like within an hour, that's an exceedingly close event. These are concerns. These are real. These are material. These are, material concerns is a good way to put it, that oftentimes do prevent people, taking part. There are also, of course, concerns in terms of physicality. It is a very physical hobby. You need to, be able to wear those 3 layers of linen and wool and run around in a hot field all day, in the sun and everything, and not, suffer terribly physically. I mean, if I'm able to do it, then most people are able to do it. Don't get me wrong, but it's something to keep in mind. If you're very young, you want to make sure that you're able to handle that sort of thing. Generally speaking, I'd say there is no minimum age. It's merely, is it appropriate for you as an individual? And the best way, the only way that you can learn if it is something you can get involved with, be that as a civilian reenactor, be it as a musician, or in fact being as a musket man, which the minimum age is usually 16 years old. Depends on the group that you're with, but usually 16 years old. The best way, the only thing you can do really is get out to those events, talk with people, and learn more about it. Be there on the site and watch it all happening. See if it's the sort of thing that you want to be involved with. No minimum age.
Well, I do hate to say this yet again. That was a fantastic answer, but I'm going to have to ask you the question again. What I meant was, what era is too soon?
Oh!
Because, like, I have people talking to me about reenacting what we're doing currently.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I like I said, that was a beautiful response.
We'll make it work in post. You're throwing in another question. All right. How soon is too soon temporally?
Indeed.
Yes. Okay. All right. Oh no, that's a harder question. I went
Now,
on for like 20 minutes on the last one. You expect me to answer this one now?
I'll give you a little bit of fodder here. We have some people that are reenacting Desert Storm, and I don't mean like they're going out there and doing mock battles, but they are.
Like they
dressing.
have the kit and yeah.
Hmm.
I've
And they're
so
almost
I know.
all
Sorry.
Iraq veterans.
Okay.
So that kind of gives them a little bit of
That
leeway,
yeah,
you
that
know?
definitely makes it a little bit more comfortable in my mind, I think. I do know I know a lot of I know a couple of people I'll say who do Yugoslav reenacting, like the
Okay.
Yugoslavian, like the Bosnian War. And I must say, given my own reading and my experience, like with the Bosnian War, that makes me kind of uncomfortable. It's not something that I'd really be comfortable doing, I don't think. And now, keeping in mind, of course, I portray a Red Army soldier, like some of the worst, alongside the German soldiers, in terms of like overall atrocities that the army's committed and whatnot. Um, but for some reason, and I'm not going to say it's logical because again, I do portray the Second World War. I'm not going to say it's logical, but I do feel a little uncomfortable with a conflict like the Bosnian War, mainly because of how close it is. Um, I know personally that I would not want to do a Vietnam impression because again, that was my grandfather's war, and that I have a couple of friends who fought in Vietnam. I have seen in a much more real sense the impact that the war had on those people, and I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable myself personally doing that sort of thing. Now that being said, that's a cop out. Any sort of a oh well, I personally wouldn't do it, but that's a cop out answer. Um, how soon is too soon? I'm not sure that I would say that any time period is truly too soon. It all depends on the context of how it is being done. Because theoretically, and I do feel rather strongly about this, um, time does not necessarily make atrocity any better. It doesn't make it acceptable. The fact that pirates, were, murdering people, stealing property, and visiting, horrible crimes on humanity, 300 years ago, doesn't make it acceptable for them to all of a sudden be, cutesy fun teaching our children how to spell and learning the alphabet and whatnot. That's not okay in my mind. I'd like to think that Al Qaeda is not going to be teaching, our own children in 100 years from now, how to spell particular words. Um, Sort of the equivalent in some ways. Um,
You really did a great job on that talking during your Salem video.
Which to
yes,
me
that's
is my
exactly
favorite video you
that's
did.
exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, the fact that Salem now the entire town is dedicated in so many ways to just spitting on the memory of people who were murdered in the past, and that's not acceptable in my mind. Now that being said, say there's a group. Yeah, let's talk. Let's go even more extreme than Desert Storm. Let's talk about say Operation Iraqi Freedom. Say there's a reenactment of that. There's a public display in a fair or something like that of people who were not military veterans, but who had the full kit and everything, and they were doing all of that. We might be able to say that there are some concerns as far as like stolen valor is concerned, which is actually worthwhile talking about as well, but that's another conversation. Well, that's beside the point for now, I think. Like say like a reenactment society or whatever that's dedicated to displaying it. Now, what I think I'd be most keen on seeing is what do they look like? Are we talking about a bunch of again? Are we talking about a group of people who are passionate and who are learned, who are experts, or at least very close to being experts, who know an awful lot about the not only material culture, the when they used this gun in this year and in this battle they killed this many of the enemy and then in this year they did this other thing, not only that, the physical story, so to say, but are they well versed? Are they familiar? Are they aware of? And are they passionate for the social history, the more intimate aspect of the conflict, the personal side of the war? And are they attempting through their portrayals to take those personal, those intimate, those individual stories of human suffering, of privation, of the horror of war and why it's necessary and what makes it a sacrifice? Are they taking that story and bringing it to the public as best they can in order to gain a better understanding, both for themselves and for the public? In that case, No time period is too soon. That is good. That is everything that reenactment at its height is meant in my mind to be. That is the purpose of military reenactment. Now, are they out there as a bunch of kids with airsoft guns, wearing their milsurp stuff, talking about how cool the war was, and just kind of playing a game? They're out there for Call of Duty type stuff. At that point, I would say any time period is too soon. If you're out there, if you're doing it, I will go out there to say this, and I do certainly hope that I don't offend anyone, because I do not mean to offend any military reenactors when I say these sorts of things. But if you are going out there, to do American War of Independence reenactment, for example, my time period, and you're going out there with the intention of, oh yeah, we whooped them British, and I'm gonna show them what for, and I'm just out here to shoot my guns, and I don't care about the public, I don't care about having an accurate uniform, I don't care about education, I just want to have fun at the weekend. That's playing at war. Now, don't get me wrong. I have fun. I play at war. I have a good time. I have a great deal of fun shooting the gun and, pretending to be a soldier back in the... That's fun. It's enjoyable in the same way that playing a video game is fun, or, watching a movie about it is fun. But that's only part of the equation. I also consider it an educational pursuit. But if an individual is going into it without any semblance of education, both for themselves, for other members in the community, and for the public at large, then at that point, they're missing the most integral part of the hobby, and it can be seen in a way, in a certain capacity, as perhaps being a bit of a mockery of those sacrifices of that story. Again, not exactly a direct answer, but I hope satisfactory, that it depends. In a way, no time period's off limits. In another way, every time period can be off limits. It depends on the individual who's putting it on.
And I will make it known, if you are that type of person who does want to go and, as they say, burn powder, there are actually events for that where the public's not invited, and there are targets, and you can be as Farby as you want with your personal gear.
Oh yeah. No, there are communities for that. I mean, historical shooting is also, fantastic, great hobby, absolutely.
And then there's that as well. I want to make it clear that there are two separate groups, because there is a group that tries to... I hate this term because I feel like it's slightly inaccurate talking about events that are so recent, but experimental archaeology.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to use the equipment with the full kit in a live fire situation to not only theoretically teach the public, and you are teaching the public, but more importantly, you're teaching yourself, and you're learning things that you can learn in no other way.
Exactly. And in that point, that's valuable. That's good, because it is, again, educational in its spirit. I don't think that there are an awful lot of people out there who, who are like the negative that I just described. I do think that the majority of reenactors are interested in education and in sharing that story. Whether or not, they necessarily are the best at doing so, it can be talked about, of course. But I do think that the majority, for the most part, the community is very good at that. Maybe there are some individuals who do not carry the appropriate reverence that I think that they should. And, it is that sense of reverence for the past that I think makes the distinction of reenactment being okay as opposed to just playing at war. But, it's highly personal. It is highly personal. And as such, I cannot make, in myself, really a judgment call as far as what is acceptable and what's not. I cannot know what is in the other person's heart, and I will not presume to know what is in their heart. Again, if I see like the Vietnam reenactors, does it kind of make me a bit uncomfortable? In a way, yes. But also, if I can, not something I've done before, have a conversation with those people, and if I can learn more about the time period, then they've done their job, and they've done it very, very well. And I do look forward to the day that I can have that conversation with a Vietnam War reenactor, and hopefully, be a little bit more like okay with it in my own mind, and get over that idea that, this is, how my grandfather suffered. But what these people are doing is educational.
I have actually heard a very good argument, although I want to say that I think your argument was better, that one should give about 20 years. And during that 20 years, it should be veterans and movies, where you can have a. I know movies aren't necessarily the most accurate of things,
but
But you can have portrayals.
a
Yeah.
controlled portrayal.
I
And
can. Yeah, I mean, I can see that.
after 20 years, it's critical to start reenacting because you need the people who were there experiencing these things to help educate the first generation of reenactors
Yeah.
so that memory isn't lost.
That's honestly that's a very good point. And I mean, I'm not sure like why 20? Why not 19? Why not 21? But
Yeah.
that's the um
Arbitrary number.
that's the philosopher in me wondering like why exactly this number? Why not the others? What makes it so special? But no, but in principle, yeah, I agree with that sentiment, I suppose. Because yeah, it would still be kind of, I mean, if some guy were to have a reenactor's quote unquote impression of, him at
Fallujah or something.
yeah, at Fallujah, exactly. It's like, well, no, at that point, that's not really reenactment. That's just stolen valor, isn't it? Because it is highly believable that you actually were there. And at that point, I think we can say that it falls outside of education because, well, a whole other set of concerns, maybe.
Now, I don't like getting political, but I will make an exception for things that I consider blatantly wrong that, people on both the left and the right side can agree are wrong, like murder.
Yeah.
And I think everyone can agree that stolen valor is wrong.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. And in the end, like I don't hate the people that do it, but then in fairness,
I've never met any.
that, and I don't hate anyone. I like to think that I hate the things that people do. I don't hate people.
That's a very nice way of looking
I'm
at
not
it.
a Christian. I'm a wannabe Christian, is what I say to people. No, but because honestly, like looking at some of the videos where people get like called out for it and whatnot, I've seen, it strikes me that oftentimes these are people who are socially isolated, people who are going through a lot of problems, the people who have mental problems, mental deficiencies in some way, and they're I don't know exactly what they're trying to do, but it's not malicious. I don't think oftentimes it's just they're trying to belong. They're trying to feel a sense of pride, maybe, and they're misguided. It's disordinate the way that they're going about these things, but it's not. I don't hate these people, so to say, but yes, it is a despicable thing that is being done by these people. It is absolutely a moral wrong thing to claim that legacy when it is not your own.
Do you mind giving a definition of what stolen valor is for the audience?
Oh, of course. No. If I were to put on the uniform, I'm sorry, this is an example, not a definition, but I'll go for it anyways.
Sure.
If I were to go to a like a military surplus store or whatever and find a whole bunch of like modern day American fatigues, and I'd put it all on, and I find like an old pair of boots, and I pull those on, and like everything looks all wrong and everything, but it's like clearly meant to be a modern uniform, and I start parading around an airport or restaurants, be like, hey, do you have a military discount? That's stolen valor, because it is not. Reenactment is donning the uniforms of the past, even if it is a very recent past, but it is the past. And attempting to show people with no presumption that you were there or that you're doing these things, but showing people like, hey, here's how they did things. And you're attempting to honor a memory outside of your own. Usually, I mean, you can be a veteran and do reenactments of your period, I suppose, but for the most part, it is you're honoring a memory outside of your own experience. You are honoring an external in that way. Stolen valor is you are donning the uniform and you are saying, this is my legacy. This is me. I was there in a way. You're attempting to basically take that glory, if you will, that memory. Glory is a very Victorian way of putting it. You're attempting to take that memory, that idea, and rather than through your actions glorify it for the individuals to whom it belongs, you're attempting to seize it and take it for yourself. You're attempting to take a piece of that when it is not yours. These are very vague, ethereal things, but that's the idea of stolen valor. That's the concept of stolen valor. It's wearing the military uniform when you're not actually in the military. To put it
that was very succinct.
Yeah.
I do want to mention a topic, though, that I actually don't think gets talked about enough when it comes to stolen valor, that sometimes it's accidental, and there's very specific situations where it's accidental.
Oh, yes.
For example, I was at a military museum this a little while ago, the Lions Air Museum, and the California Civil Air Patrol was there, and they wear modern military fatigues. That's their uniform, and that could very quickly get them accidentally mistaken.
Yeah.
Oh, from a personal anecdote, I was in the Sea Scouts, and our Sea Scout uniform is just the current Navy uniform. There's no difference. We recently had a change in that. I think this year we're switching to a different uniform. But so we went to public events as Sea Scouts, and it took me far too long to understand. Like, there were people coming up to me and saying, like, thank you for your service.
And I'm like,
Thinking,
yeah, exactly. And I'm like, yeah, I'm helping out at this event. I don't see how that's
What are you talking about?
service,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Before
So
realizing, oh, wait, they mean something much deeper than that.
Exactly. So I want to warn people. If you're going to call anyone out, which I do not recommend, I'm very non-confrontational.
Most certainly. It's one thing to walk up and be like, hey, like, can I ask what this uniform is of? And they say, oh, it's of this unit. I'm like, oh, did you serve in that unit? And they say, oh, no, you can, maybe if you want to say, like, oh, perhaps respectfully you shouldn't be wearing it, something like that, whatever. But, people who, like, walk up and just assume immediately, like, oh, this is stolen valor. Like,
exactly. That's what I was trying to get across.
Don't make the assumption. No, you're absolutely right in that way. In the end, the entire thing, it is all a game of intention. Because honestly, as well, talking about intention, there could even be a guy who buys a bit of military surplus, like, oh, this looks cool, I want to wear it.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's fine. Heck, from the reenactors perspective, my Soviet winter kit, I have my Soviet greatcoat. Whenever I have to shovel snow, like if I help my father shovel snow in his driveway, I wear the greatcoat because it's the warmest piece of clothing that I have. Like I wear my jack boots and my greatcoat. It's like, yeah, it looks wacky, but I'm warm. And some people can do that with modern military. Never, ever, ever assume someone's intention when you do not know them.
That's again beautiful. I do have an interesting point of stolen valor that I noticed recently. That kind of walked an unusual line for me. I was shopping and there was a woman wearing an iron cross.
Just like around her neck?
Just wearing, specifically she was wearing a knight's cross, and yes, around her neck.
And
was this a young woman or an old?
She was about 30, and
Okay.
I went up and asked her, like, hey, what's going on there? Mostly because I was shocked that someone would be publicly doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not that the Iron Cross should ever be. I think that the Iron Cross.
It's a historical symbol. It's not just Third Reich. It goes well
Exactly.
beyond that. But
It's been a symbol of the German people and all that jazz.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a symbol of, well, more even than the German.
Exactly.
It's a common symbol. Was she wearing any other historical, just regular clothing or like?
No, she was in all black though.
Ah.
And so I kind of thought she was a biker.
Yeah.
And I also don't know if you or the audience is aware, but surfers wear the Iron Cross.
Really?
Yes, they refer to it as the Surfer's Cross. It's got the big Kaiser W and all that.
What?
Yeah, it has the big Kaiser W 1914, the whole 9 yards.
This is Surfer's Cross.
Mm.
I hate it. Thank you. Dear Lord.
Yes.
There's a person with a boogie board with a crown over. What? Okay, all right.
It horrified me because I was in a surf shop and I saw one, and I asked "Hey, why do you guys got the Kaiser Cross?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh no, that's the Surfer's Cross. Like people after World War II would go up into their grandfather's, attic, and they would wear these crosses." And I'm like, "That's a World War I cross, but let's ignore that."
Oh my God.
And he's like, "Yeah, they would just wear it around their necks until they rusted away."
Yeah, no, it has crowns on it. It says 1813. It looks purely historical, except there's a guy on a surfboard on it. Oh my God. Why I didn't sign up for this when I agreed to do this. I didn't know that my innocent eyes would have to behold this abomination. Oh God.
And if you do flip it around, it has 1914 on it sometimes because it is a World War I era.
Yeah, of course it does. Oh God. All right.
So I walked up to this woman thinking that it was something like that she was wearing it as a surfer's cross. And I asked her, like, hey, what you wearing that for? Like, what's the meaning behind there? And she just went, oh, I went to Germany, bought it, thought it was cool.
Yeah. People who
Which,
don't know what they're wearing.
And she's like, I think it's real. And, like, by the way, I overheard her telling someone else that it was real.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, oh, I can tell you because I collect this stuff. So I looked at it, and sure enough, she was just wearing a legitimate 100-plus-year-old Iron Cross.
Oh God.
Ah, and I had that dilemma in
That's
my head,
funny.
like, is this stolen valor? Like, clearly, this woman did
Hmm.
not fight in World War
Like
One.
wearing
A
not
different
not so
nation.
much, yeah, like attempting to claim the legacy, so to say, but wearing these battle honors, these, deeply significant things, these
Hmm.
meaningful, impactful things, and wearing it like as saying like as a fashion icon.
Like wearing the Iron Cross or wearing the Victoria's Cross. Not that you could ever
Hmm.
come across one of those.
Yeah.
Or
Like as just like a casual, like, oh yeah, I thought it looked neat, so I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, like I said to, and I did say this, and I feel a little bit bad about being controversial or confrontational. I said, that's kind of like if a German just started wearing a Purple Heart, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Cool.
mm-hmm. So anyway, that was just a weird interaction I had.
It's also yeah, a fascinating idea is is wearing, these deeply significant like historical items, as just like casual wear, like is that a form of, in a way, dishonoring the memory of what they represent? Um, like whenever I have like my reenactment stuff, none of it's actually surplus stuff. Like none of it's antique or old stuff.
even your
If
Soviet.
it is, no, well, so the Mosin is 1943, but otherwise all the clothing, at least the vast majority. I don't think any of my clothing is original stuff. Um, Although even with the rifle though, even with the rifle, it is a conversation worth having. Although I think for another day. Is it proper to the memory to be using it in the way that I'm using it? Is it respectful? Is it disrespectful? Does it not matter? I don't know. It's an interesting like approach to think about it in this way. And honestly, these are the sorts of questions that I kind of think about an awful lot because I get worried like am I doing the right thing in what I do? Like is reenactment okay or is it just like a video game? Like I go back and forth an awful lot with these sort of things. Is maybe why I had those like very almost like canned answers like off the top of my head for you. It's another very interesting dynamic of this person saw a war artifact, something which is deeply significant, deeply meaningful for the man who presumably wore it in history in the past, and now she's like, it looks neat, so I'm gonna wear it on my neck. Like, is that disrespectful? Is that bad? Is it something we should go against? Is it a form of, as you say, stolen valor? It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I for sure wouldn't tell her she couldn't, but that doesn't mean I don't wonder to myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the difference between like I actively think you're doing something wrong and the social dynamic of I'm not going to be a jerk by telling you what I think. That's no, absolutely.
Well, we've been going on for quite a while, so I do want to ask my final question, and then we'll wrap up here.
Yes, sir.
What topic do you love the most that you think you could write a book on, and are you going to write that book?
One of these days, yes, I'd like to. I mean, I do have my story idea, of course, as everyone does, it seems, for a fiction novel. Um, I'm fascinated with like fantasy settings that are just ultra low fantasy, and what I'd love to write a book for, is a like a Napoleonic style world where it is a completely historical, like regular, normal world. Everything is approached in an historical sense and in a historical fashion. Nothing's fantasy about it. There was no fantasy in the past. There's presumably never going to be fantasy in the world. It's just a regular old world. It's not our world because that just goes into historical fiction, which I feel less comfortable with, at least as an author. But then something happens within this world, this normal logical world. Something like a fantasy big bad enters into the world. It's like, okay, what are we going to do now? Like, how do we respond to this? Like, if magic suddenly becomes a thing, those sorts of concepts. I find that very compelling, and I do have my story idea for that. Of, yeah, basically Napoleonic Europe, if you will, but then like a Lovecraftian style, otherworldly abomination horror from the deep just kind of shows up, and it's like, oh, okay, so now what? But that is very vague, and that's way off in the future if I ever decide to actually finally do that sort of thing. I have like a prologue written for it, but again, that's everyone does, don't they? Um,
Well, I
Something a bit
highly
more.
encourage you to do it.
Aha, thank you.
Because
Um,
With the beauty of Amazon publishing, frankly, the only thing that holds you back nowadays from publishing a book is putting in the effort, and I know you could do it.
that's very. I was going to say that's very true, but then you complimented me, and now I feel like a jerk if I say that. But I mean, no, thank you very much. And I mean that is a very good point. Is that really it is just one's own will to actually get it done. And in fairness, I do have an audience to advertise it to. And actually, on a similar line, it's not so much a not really a full book, but actually, I have scheduled later on next week, on Tuesday, actually, before the regularly scheduled D&D sessions that I have with my friends. I'm going to be meeting with a friend of mine. We are going to start looking into a potential process of designing an 18th century styled role-playing game. Like
oh,
a
that's
D20
fantastic.
style tabletop role-playing game. The aim of it being a purely historical game, not like, no fantasy elements at all. Not low fantasy, just pure history. Real world setting, probably again, American War of Independence, maybe some Seven Years' War stuff as well. But we want to design a game system that is not only fun and original, but and we have a few ideas on how to do this, but also appropriate to the 18th century. Something that really evokes and feels like appropriate to the time period, that it encourages you to play in a historically authentic way, so to say, including, of course, the health system being based on balance of humors and whatnot.
Oh,
Humoral theory.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, there we go. And then of course there will be within that a great deal of fluff being written. I plan on, of course, not only doing a fair bit of the writing myself. He'll do some writing for it. I would also, or at least we'd like to. We're in the talks of getting some ghost writers for various like blurbs and things here and there. I have a number of artists like kind of in mind that I'd like to contact, and some have agreed to do so for artwork for the thing in future. But again, this is quite literally in the earliest of planning stages, so we'll have to see how things go. But that's what I'd like to do, and hopefully have something relatively solid as far as like something I can show people as far as like, hey, here's where we're going with this, and maybe like a Kickstarter type thing around Christmas time. Um, oh God,
Well,
I just turned this into a plug. I'm sorry. Um,
ah, in a moment, I'm going to
but
ask you to plug two different things. So,
aha, very good. But and then of course within that, there would be a great deal, I'd like to think at least, of like fluff stories of like, quick little like 2 or 3 page blurbs about the experience of, common soldiers during the period, common people during the period. I have an excellent like image in my mind, so to say, of a description of a battle from an individual soldier's perspective, and the entire thing based around the drum beat, the rolling of the drums. Have you ever seen War and Peace, the old Russian film?
Sadly, I have not.
Well, there's an excellent battle scene, Battle of Borodino, in which at one point like Russian reinforcements are coming onto the field, and you're introduced to the idea that the reinforcements are coming onto the field by the rolling of the drums. The dun 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 as they're coming along, and you see as the introduction to this force coming into the field is you see the boots lifting and stamping one after another in this perfect rhythm, in this order. And you hear, it's presumed to be like the guy like imagining it to himself. I don't know what he's actually saying, but he's like repeating it to himself. And I think he's saying something like, like left, 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 or like 1, 2, 3, something like that. I imagine this intro blurb of being all set around the rolling of the drums and just the man focusing on his world around him. And when you are a soldier under arms in a formation, your entire world devolves to the marching of the drum, the stamping of the boots, and the cross belts of the man in front of you. And just that context, I would say, I'd love to explore that in like a little short story that I would probably either include in this thing or maybe just like put out there as like my own little work. But that's like one project that I absolutely would love to do in microcosm as part of the larger piece.
Well, I really do truly wish to see that because I think the world needs more, frankly, more board games in general, but a structured, like you said, role playing game is just something that we do need more of.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna ask you to, for those two plugs. I realized my phrasing earlier was awful.
That's fine.
Anything else you want to plug in general?
Um, I'm gonna launch a website soon, but that's not anything I can plug particularly much because I
Fair
don't really
enough.
know what the website's going to be called, and I have no idea when it's actually going to happen. But hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, I'll be launching a website, so I'll put a video up about that if you're so inclined. Um,
And when you do that, there'll be a link in the description.
oh, fantastic! Thank you, sir. And then otherwise, I suppose I can just here's a plug. Yes,
Mm,
I'm being selfish.
go for
Plug
it.
that I actually wanted to make like from the very start. If you are interested, if you listen to any amount of this stuff, and for some ungodly reason you not only made it to the end, but you're thinking, hey, I kind of like what this Brandon guy had to say about reenactment, I'm interested. I want to learn more. You can go to brigade.org. That is brigade.org. That is the newly launched and vastly improved website of the Brigade of the American Revolution, and it will be an excellent place for you to get started on that journey. There's also, of course, a Facebook page for the Brigade of the American Revolution, and my own Facebook page, facebook.com/Brandon FYT, Brandon FYT for Brandon F YouTube. And if you'd like to ask me any questions at all, I'd love to get back to you at least in some amount of time. To help you, on that pathway. But more than anything else, brigade.org is going to be one of the best resources that you can use. I referenced earlier that when I first got involved, the brigade was not very technologically skilled or up to date. That is changing. That is changing rapidly. The brigade is on the upswing as far as tech is concerned, and we are making massive improvements in such regards. Yeah, that's my plug.
The link will be in the description for that.
Haha.
Now, the other thing I want you to plug, and this will hopefully pop up on screen if I can get the thing to work.
Oh.
What video would you recommend they watch of yours first?
Oh.
Because there's a chance one of my guys might come over to you, and I want them to know what you think is your best work.
Oh, let's see here. YouTube.com, my channel. I have to look at the list. I would dare to say, ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba.
Now, I personally like your long-winded stuff myself. Like I said, I love your Salem video. That would be somewhere around here. And in addition to that, I want you guys to, go into it knowing that it is a little bit long-winded. But if you listen to this, you'll love that.
Yeah, that's very true. This is long-winded enough. I would say some of the videos, I'm not even sure they're necessarily my best, but they're the ones that I'm most proud of. I would say, um, either the video that I did for Operation Odysseus called
Mm-hmm.
a Titan of Pre-Industry, the Ship of the Line, in which I talk about just the scope of old warships, how large they were, basically. Either that, or there is a video that I have, and I'm actually planning on making potentially tomorrow a video on a very similar theme. In fact, it may well be out sometime tomorrow or within the next week. About an account by a certain Mr. George Robert Gleig, who, after a battle in the War of 1812, he was a British officer, went to find one of his fallen comrades and wept over the corpse after the battle. It's a beautiful account that he wrote about this event. Hopefully that'll be one of my nicer videos. But if that's not up, then there's also a video called I believe I called it something along the lines of the tragedy of Mrs. Joseph Calkin or something like that.
Okay.
Something like that. We can have a link or something like that maybe down below. But yeah. Yes, something like that. But basically, it's a video where it's a very simple thing. I just read an account from a book called The Recollections of Rifleman Harris, which is a primary source about an enlisted man, a soldier, common soldier in the Napoleonic Wars, and it details, again, one of those moments which I think we, as a society, as historians, as reenactors, do not talk about enough, and that is the simple act of a woman. Trying after a battle to move among the bodies, the aftermath of the battle, and find the corpse, the body of her husband. And just the honestly, even just God, like even just thinking about that account, like it almost it brings a tear to my eye a little bit. It is. I won't go into detail about it because otherwise I might actually start crying. And funny thing is, actually, in that video, I very nearly do break down and start crying. You can kind of tell, like, if you know me, you know the telltale signs of like, oh, his like lip is curling a little bit, like, oh God, he's not having a good time right now. It is among the most deeply moving, tragic, sorrowful, and impactful accounts that I've ever read of, again, that emotion, just the raw feeling of a woman moving from mutilated corpse to corpse and knowing that at any moment the next one she sees is going to be the man that she loved, and that her world is irreparably changed for forever, especially, of course, in the long 18th century where, there are not very many, women who can live on their own without the protection of a spouse, particularly in the army. It's a deeply moving account, and it's basically I just talk about the account and the implications thereof, and that's one of my favorites, I'd say.
And I actually really want to bounce off of that because what you said was actually starting to jerk tears from my eyes. We got to remember not only the people who were involved, not only the people who were involved tangentially, but most importantly, all these people were people, whether they be American or British or Russian or German or Japanese. They were all people who were loved and who loved, and
Yes.
I think people forget that.
Yes, and even the people who were doing, not only fighting on the side of, but even doing themselves the worst and the worst of the atrocities. Well, what does that represent? What does it represent when a man, when a person is able to visit such extraordinary violence and harm and terror on their fellow man? What does that represent but a terrible sickness within them, a terrible tragedy of what had to happen, be it a long, slow, painful, brought out process. For example, say someone like Adolf Hitler, who had a life of abuse before he did the horrible things that he did. Now, of course, it doesn't justify the things that he did, but it provides the understanding of why it happened in a way. Or perhaps one singular moment of just snapping from a horrible, irrevocable thing happening to the person. But whatever it is, the thing that has to happen to basically damage the person so much so that they can do those horrible things, even that turns them not into an object, again, of hatred. Never hate your fellow man. Never hate another person because they are only human. They're only man. Rather hate the things that they do and hate the things that allow and that cause them to do the things that they do. Hate evil, not the men who do that evil. Pity the criminal. Do not hate the criminal, but pity them. Uh, Again, for their plight, and that is absolutely the most important social element to not only military history but all of history, and indeed daily life. I dare. Now I'm getting very much soapboxy, but in daily life is to understand. Yes, dude, just love your fellow man. Come on, that's all I'm
I,
asking for.
I really do think that's needed more. And I have one final story to share because I don't think many people know this one. And at risk of making the wereaboos more angry at me, again,
You
the
always do. It's impossible to avoid.
the child of a German refugee whose family fought for Germany and experienced the
Mhm.
horrors on both sides, and I still get like, oh, you don't actually care about the German opinion on things.
Yeah.
Um, the man who was the head of the SS, let's put it, Advanced Interrogation,
Hmm.
was part of Project Paperclip. He was brought to the U.S. to teach our men how to torture people.
Hmm.
And when he was done, he had one request, that he be able to live out his life with his daughter and do mosaics.
Oh.
So here's this man who did and invented the cruelest forms of torture we know of,
Yeah.
and all he wanted to do, realistically, is make art with his daughter.
Yeah. And there is something beautiful in that.
And if you want to see his art, you can go to Disneyland.
Disneyland.
Yeah, the murals in Sleeping Beauty's castle were done by him.
Oh my.
And
his daughter continued his work after he passed on, and now I think they don't do mosaics anymore at Disney World or Disneyland out of respect to her.
Wow.
So anyway, ending it on
A good,
note
a
of
strange
sorts.
but a nice note, yes. In a
Ah,
way.
Well, any final words?
Um, subscribe to Kreeger Cast.
and likewise, check out Brandon's channel,
Thank
please.
you. I've enjoyed I enjoyed my time here immensely, sir. Truth be told, I at first I was thinking like, oh God, I'm gonna be staying up later than I want to tonight. I'm not. Maybe I should reschedule. I don't know. But I am immensely glad that we were finally able to sit down and do this together. I know that I talked an awful lot. I have a tendency to do that. Feel free to cut down and edit wherever is necessary, just as long as you don't make me look terrible. No,
That is
but again, thank you so very much, sir, for reaching out to me. I'm very glad that you did. I enjoyed this conversation, and here's hoping, well, maybe we can do it again sometime.
I would enjoy that immensely. And until next time, dear listener, see you out there.